Time now for our Wall Street Week Daily segment with David Westin, who joins us every day around this time. And David, there's been so much talk about the United Auto Workers strike and the effect on Ford, GM, and Stellantis. But we forget there's a whole ecosystem of parts makers and other companies that are also being affected.
Exactly. In some ways, those automakers are just the tip of the iceberg. There's a big iceberg down below the water. And to take us through that supply chain issue, we welcome now Bindiya Vakil. She is Resilinc CEO. Welcome back, Bindiya. It's great to have you here. So give us a sense of just how many ancillary businesses there are feeding into the auto industry that are either now being affected or will be.
David, there are tens of thousands. And let me give you a little bit of a snippet on Resilinc and why we have this unique perspective into the global supply chain. Resilinc monitors global supply chain disruptions 24/7 in more than 100 languages. And more importantly, we map these supply chains down multiple tiers deep, all the way down to the small suppliers and raw material providers that are vital to supply chains operating. Put these together, our customers, including the automakers, work with their suppliers multiple tiers deep to navigate through these challenging disruptions. So as you can imagine right now, a small disruption at the OEM level really ripples through the supply chain as you go to the suppliers and suppliers globally. So this is not just limited to the United States and suppliers here. Globally, when demand grows up, as it did before the strike went into effect, there was what we call a bullwhip effect, where suppliers saw an increase or a spike in demand. And now as the demand is dropping, as this strike expands to the supplier, this looks like a manifold reduction in demand. And these suppliers can be everyone from a small mom and pop shop that does some tooling, or it could be a large company that manufactures massive systems.
So let me pick up on those small mom and pop shops. And your map, as you look at it, how many of these suppliers are, I guess they call them tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers rather than tier 1, because they can be very small, like family-owned businesses, as I understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the automotive supply chain, we've mapped down 4 to 5 tiers deep, and we see everything from semiconductor, which obviously shows up in our cars, everything we do. So some of that supply chain at the 3rd and 4th tier looks fairly similar to a typical high-tech or consumer electronics supply chain. But then when you look at things like seats and threads, I mean, you'll see the seatbelt thread makers, and you will see the upholstery, and those small parts can come from suppliers that aren't terribly sophisticated. And there's an ecosystem of suppliers around each of those factories as well.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex and fairly networked industry.
I am curious about the potential longer-term changes. The last time we had a major supply chain disruption, of course, born out of the pandemic, we did see some major structural changes that took place as everyone sort of had to reassess what their supply chains looked like. Do you think if this does drag on, we'll see something similar play out for the automakers?
Absolutely. In fact, right now, there are 5 mega trends already in play why supply chains are in a state of flux. One is extreme weather. 2 is the demographics and labor disruptions, which, by the way, is one of the top 5 reported disruptions in our database. The 3rd is geopolitical shifts. 4th is ESG, and 5th is cybersecurity. So these are 5 mega threats, if you will, that have already caused supply chains to either shift, move around, do things differently, cause suppliers to change how they operate. So they're long-term, specifically to the labor strike. Yes, we see a lot of our customers on the Resilinc platform assessing suppliers, really understanding where they have unionized factories and those types of dependencies to manage this in a more proactive way.
And we should point out, too, I mean, as they're doing that, it's one thing to sort of look at the supply chain through the context of the cars that you're making now. But if you believe in, I guess, what the future is supposed to hold, where we all move to renewable energy vehicles of some type, how much does that change the calculus?
It changes quite a lot. The electric vehicle supply chain looks very much like almost like a networking or switching product, but on wheels. So it's a very different type of, there's a lot more automation. There's a very different type of componentry that goes into those. It's complex. So the kind of, plus there's a tremendous amount of AI and AI-driven automation that is coming our way on the EV side as well. So there's a lot changing actually as we speak.
Bindiya, to come back to this strike right now, how long before it causes permanent damage to the supply chain? Because I have read some accounts that some of the smaller suppliers actually do not have enough cash on hand. They don't have the resources to go very long into the strike. Could we do permanent damage to the supply chain?
You know, it is on a lot of our customers take care of their suppliers to some extent. You know, we see customers looking at which suppliers are highest impact to revenue, for example, and then extend them lines of credit. This is something we recommend companies do as we speak. Really monitor which of your suppliers are potentially in financial distress risk. Assess their financials, have candid and collaborative conversations with them. And then there are several things we recommend our customers do. And many of them are doing that right now.